One afternoon, after another sleepless night, I decided to take a walk. The sun felt foreign on my skin, but I forced myself out. I sat by a pond watching the water ripple, and for the first time in months, I felt a moment of stillness. The world didn't stop, but I did. I started writing in a notebook I had brought, not to organize my thoughts, but to let them spill out without judgment. I wrote about my fears, my doubts, and the weight I carried. Slowly, the anxiety began to lose its grip like a mist clearing at dawn. I realized that the panic I felt was not a sign of weakness, but a signal that I needed to listen to my own heart. In that moment, I began to see the cracks as spaces for light to enter. I was not broken. I was being reshaped. After going through a terrible bout of anxiety and stress, I saw the beautiful version of myself. With each passing day, I practiced small acts of kindness toward myself. I stopped fighting the tears and let them wash over me. I started remembering the things that made me feel alive, painting, reading under a blanket, and the warmth of a hand holding mine. I reached out to a friend, and instead of hiding my struggle, I shared it. Her quiet understanding was like a balm. I learned that vulnerability is not weakness. It is the door to connection. I also started to embrace imperfection, accepting that I didn't need to have everything figured out. The stress didn't vanish, but it no longer defined me. I began to see my own beauty not in the mirror, but in the way I started to smile again, genuinely, without force. Each step forward was a quiet revolution. For a long time, I lived in a fog of anxiety and stress. It was a heavy blanket that smothered every moment, making me feel small and fragmented. I would look in the mirror and see only the cracks, the sleepless nights, the racing thoughts, the trembling hands. That reflection felt like a stranger I didn't want to know. I convinced myself that the real me was lost somewhere beneath that weight, buried under the pressure of a life that had become too much. But something strange happened in the aftermath of that storm. When the waves of panic finally began to recede, they didn't leave behind the wreckage I expected. Instead, I started noticing tiny glimmers of light in the spaces between the shadows. A deep breath that came easier, a moment of stillness that felt like a gift, a kindness in my own voice when I spoke to myself instead of the usual harsh criticism. I started to see that the anxiety hadn't broken me. It had carved out a new shape, one I hadn't recognized before. I began to understand that this journey wasn't about returning to who I was, but about discovering who I had become. And what I found was not a broken version of myself, but a beautiful one, shaped by the very struggles I had tried so hard to escape. I woke up and looked at myself with new eyes. The anxiety had not left completely, but it had transformed into a teacher. I saw a woman who had walked through fire and emerged softer, stronger, and more alive. The beautiful version of myself was not the one I had imagined, flawless and unbreakable. She was this, a being with scars that told stories, eyes that had wept but could still sparkle, and a heart that knew its own depth. I realized that beauty is not the absence of struggle. It is the courage to stand in the middle of it and say, I am still here. That is the version of myself I finally see, and she is more radiant than I ever dreamed. I am no longer a stranger in my own reflection. I am home.